Hey guys, it's Girl Got Game, and welcome to my final thoughts on Doki Doki Literature Club Plus, an expansion to the original Doki Doki Literature Club that came out in 2017. Before I start this, you should know that these final thoughts will not include my thoughts on the original game. I did a Let's Play of the original game back in 2019, and did a video on my thoughts about that there after doing the bad ending with Sayori. So, if you're interested in my thoughts about the original game, then I'll leave a link here so you can check that out. But for the purposes of this video, this will strictly be focused on the new content added by DDLC Plus and my thoughts on that. And with that, let's begin. So, as I already mentioned, this is an expansion to the original DDLC. The first big addition you'll probably notice is that there is an in-game desktop now. Of course, the main reason for that is because DDLC was originally a PC-only game, since you needed to manipulate and delete files in order to beat the game properly. With no way to do that on a console, a virtual desktop had to be created, which makes sense. But not only is that a clever way to deal with the issue, but it was also used as an opportunity to expand the lore behind DDLC. And wow, was a lot ever added here. We learn about metaverse and see internal emails, project plans, all kinds of interesting things. I'm not going to delve into that too much right here because then I'll start theory crafting, and I don't want to get too carried away before I talk about the other parts of the expansion that I want to cover. A lot of extras were added in here. Tons of beautiful artwork featuring all our favorite literature ladies, as well as an audio library with original songs as well as new songs that were made for the expansion. As a little bit of a segue, I'd like to mention that I'm really glad they didn't alter too much in the original game when it came to this. They slightly altered the artwork, kind of cleaned it up a little bit, but it's mostly unchanged. And I don't think any of the new pieces of music are in the original game either. You only hear them in the side stories. But of course, we got quite a few new CGs of moments that happen in the side stories, as well as some new background art. And I thought it all fit quite seamlessly with what already existed in the base game, and the new songs are quite catchy, as I've caught myself humming a piece pretty often. And of course, speaking of those side stories, that of course was the main focus of DDLC Plus. 6, or should I say 7, bonus episodes of our girls showing us how the literature club got started and how they all overcame certain challenges to become such good friends. I loved this edition. It was great getting to see these girls interact without the MC coming in and messing things up for them, as well as not having to worry about spoops because of file meddling. These side stories really helped me to like the characters more than I already did, and in Natsuki's case particularly, but for all of them, my respect definitely increased as well. Each episode deals with a lesson the girls learned while forming the club and their friendships together, and was a great showcase of how different people are, and that despite differing views or differing interests, if both parties are willing to take the time, misunderstandings can be fixed and close friendships can be formed. I know that me and quite a few of you in the comments have kind of jokingly referred to my Let's Plays of these side stories as our weekly therapy sessions, but seriously, I cannot say enough how well written these stories are. They really got me soul-searching and thinking about things that I either don't take a lot of time to think about or that I hadn't thought about in a long while. In general, I'm not someone who's able to easily put my thoughts or feelings into words, not even to myself. And there were so many times playing through this where the character would say something about their feelings that would connect with me instantly. The explanations and wording that was used in the writing to describe what the characters were feeling was so perfectly expressed. I felt numerous times like the game looked into my soul and plucked my own feelings out and explained them to me better than I ever could hope to explain to myself. Which probably sounds a little strange to say, but I felt that way many times, and found it very cathartic in a lot of ways, personally. Something else I want to say that I liked about the side stories is that each one blended seamlessly into the next. It almost felt like its own kinetic visual novel, and I thought that was super well done. So yeah, all in all, I can't praise the writing enough in this. It's fantastic, and I'd highly recommend it based on that alone. Now, of course, there were no routes per se in this bonus content, so instead of having a route order, I'm going to have a side story order from least favorite to most favorite, if that makes sense, which is actually going to be super difficult to rank since I like them all for different reasons. But here it is, my favorite side stories from bottom to top. I think my least favorite was the respect side story. I loved the backstory on how Natsuki was actually the reason that Monika got into playing piano, and I loved the little kind of music video slideshow that happened when she played for Natsuki the first time. And funnily enough, this was the reason where I really learned a lot of respect for Natsuki as well. I think the main reasons this was my least favorite is simply because Natsuki was at her prickliest. She was very sensitive, which makes sense considering her personality and the fact that this was about her getting used to the girls in the club. And I also felt like it was a very short side story and was surprised when it was over, actually. Although, at the same time, guess it's better to be left wanting more than for something to drag on too long, right? Next up would be understanding. I loved learning that the MC was not the first one to share reading a book with Yuri, which shows that she actually is really patient and happy to reread stories to share it with someone else, as well as answer questions. And I loved how hard Sayori wanted to try getting into fantasy for Yuri's sake. Girl really will do anything to make her friends happy. Of course, there was unfortunately a misunderstanding, since Yuri thought it was all an act, but thankfully Sayori was patient enough to let Yuri express her fears without interruption, as well as gave her support through it all. I loved that hug from behind in the club room, even if Yuri had to teach Sayori about asking for hugging permission beforehand. It was a very sweet episode, but it's further down my list because I was really disappointed in Monika here. This episode takes place seconds after Sayori opens up to Monika about her suicidal depression, and then, because Monika's too anxious to fulfill her presidential duties, poor Sayori has to fall on the sword and go through the awkward, help the new member feel welcome stuff. I mean, I know Sayori loves to go the extra mile for people, and that Monika hadn't fully stepped into her role at this point, so it makes sense, but I still felt really bad that Sayori had to do all that work when it's really Monika's job. After that, I would put Reflection as the next one on my list. This one was so cute. I honestly wasn't expecting Yuri and Monika to be so sweet together. I absolutely adored that Yuri came to Monika for help with writing her letter, and that unexpected handhold. Where did that come from? I got a little too excited during that part. But it was so wonderful, and it made my heart squee! On a more serious note, something else I adored about this part was the scene with Sayori and Natsuki talking about how it's important to acknowledge your feelings and how your feelings don't define who you are as a person. That really got to me, along with the fact that Sayori opened up about her depression to Natsuki, and seeing how that information moved Natsuki so brought tears to my eyes. I will admit that this side story didn't really feel so much like it was dedicated to Yuri and Monika as it was just a long prelude to Natsuki and Yuri's side story, Self-Love. Of course, while Yuri and Monika did get the main focus at the end, I couldn't help but feel the two of them really didn't have a problem to solve, and it was more about setting the groundwork for the self-love episode. A good example of this is the talk between Sayori and Natsuki. While I adore that conversation, and it's one of my favorite parts about this episode, it would have made more sense if it was part of the self-love episode, since it kind of took the spotlight away from Yuri and Monika's relationship. Okay, next on my list is balance. This was a really interesting one, since it involves Sayori learning that you need to take different people's needs into consideration, and that what may help one person feel comfortable with you doesn't necessarily mean it will work for someone else. What I really liked about this one is how Monika helped Natsuki and Yuri helped Sayori, so you could really see how they've already taken steps to solidify their friendship from the side stories we experienced up to this point. I also loved that we got background on why Natsuki is so reluctant to share her writings with others, which really drives home how important her sharing her poem with Sayori is at the end. That was such a beautiful moment. If I had any downsides to talk about with this one, it's that it's once again so short. I really would have liked it to be a little longer, but other than that, I really liked it. Alright, and now my top 3. At number 3, I would put Self-Love. Natsuki and Yuri's relationship has always been one I've enjoyed. The two of them seem to aggravate each other quite easily, and they were both definitely rivals for the MC's affections in the first game. But at the same time, they're also so gosh darn similar. They both tend to overthink things and are obsessive over what they like, and are very resistant to change and things that they think they won't enjoy. I remember in the original game thinking how interesting it was that they wrote poems about the same subject sometimes, and even once intentionally did so to compare their writings. Their approaches are different, which I think is where the misunderstandings come in. Natsuki is cutesy, uses simple, easy-to-understand terms, is straight to the point, and can get quite loud when things aren't going her way. Whereas Yuri is more mature, quiet. She speaks and writes with more imagery. But deep down underneath all that, they're both very insecure girls. I loved how slow-paced the episode was. It was a pace that was definitely needed for these two characters, as they both needed time to get their thoughts together, since, as we found out, talking is hard for the both of them. I did think it was funny that they both hate conflict so much they didn't even discuss the fight or the letter that led to their daily talks in the stairwell, but I seriously loved their quiet talks, and Yuri was amazing in this one particularly. I loved how she was firm with her observations of how Natsuki's friend's treatment of her wasn't right, and that she would unleash hell upon them if they made her upset. I also loved that Yuri helped Natsuki through a really bad panic attack, with Natsuki remarking how thankful she was that Yuri was there to help her through it. I also thought it was really sweet how they could both agree that while they like Monika and Sayori, the two of them can't really understand the way that Yuri and Natsuki approach friendships completely, but Yuri and Natsuki understand that about each other perfectly. I was really glad that Natsuki dumped her toxic friends and that her and Yuri were making plans to spend more time together. Definitely think the two of them will end up growing to be very close friends indeed. Alright, my number 2 would have to be Trust. It's the very first of the side stories, but it definitely stuck with me the most. Sayori and Monika have always been the two characters that I've identified the most with, and that was never more clear to me than when I played this side story. Monika's internal struggle with perfectionism in the story made me feel like I was called out on so many things. Especially when Sayori was encouraging her to put her feelings out onto paper, and Monika wrote something down, but immediately scratched it out and went, just kidding, because it wasn't the correct answer, or the most perfect answer. That super duper got to me, because I struggle so much with perfectionism. It's hard to put out anything I think is less than perfect, and there's very few things I do in my life that I consider to be good enough. Because of that, it takes me forever to do anything, because I want to make sure it's perfect, even though that's not even possible. So watching Monika struggle with that here and throughout all of the side stories really was very inspiring to me, and I think it's going to stick with me even after finishing this game. And of course, just from a story perspective, it was so interesting seeing how the club first started off, from Monika's struggles in the early days to Sayori coming in and really breathing new life into what the club would eventually become. This episode really brought home to me even more what Monika meant about Sayori being the glue. She was there basically from the beginning. She encouraged Monika. She devoted time and thought to making the club better. She invested time and emotion into everyone in the club. She was definitely the perfect choice for vice president, and I can really see now why things fall apart in the base game when she's no longer around. I was also amazed to learn just how soon she opens up to Monika about her depression, and just how dark and serious it is. That moment between Sayori and Monika in the club room where Sayori's pouring out her heart and Monika's just holding her and listening to her without judgment is one of my favorite moments of the side stories, hands down, so I definitely had to put this as my number 2. And with that, that just leaves my number 1, which is the final side story, Equals. I didn't even know the side story existed until a couple days ago, but it definitely earned my number 1 spot because it was just such a perfect culmination of all the stories we experienced up to this final one. I was so glad, first of all, that we got one last hurrah with all the girls before saying goodbye again, and I also loved seeing them reflect on all the lessons they learned and sharing that with each other. This episode, too, really made me feel like the club was established. You can see the group has become the one we grew to know in the original game, and that was so neat to see. Not to mention that the final fading shot after Monika tells herself to write the way into her heart morphs into the opening background of the base game right before the credits roll, which I thought was a super neat touch. So there you have it, my side stories list. It took a lot of time to figure out where to rank them, and for the longest time I thought I couldn't rank them, because I just loved them all so much for different reasons, and I loved the extra background we got to learn about the characters. Now, before I get into theory crafting, I would like to do some bonus award thingies, so here's the ones I could come up with. Character I relate to the most would be Monika. She was the character I identified with the most back in the original, and this expansion has only solidified that connection I feel to her now. Although, to be honest, I can identify with all of the girls in some way or another, and it was interesting to see what traits I identified with as I played through these side stories. Favorite character? Sayori, my little bundle of sunshine. Sayori is so much fun. She's got such a good heart and cares so deeply about others. Her expressions make me laugh the most and also cry the most. She can be so random and quirky, but at the same time she has such good life advice and is really good at expressing her emotions as well as helping others parse through theirs. And because of her daily struggle against the dark rain clouds of feelings she deals with, I always feel very protective of her. I was so glad to get more time to spend with her in these side stories, since she's the character we didn't spend as much time with in the base game. So glad to get to know her more and fall in love with her more. Favorite new piece of music? Piece by Piece. It's the song that plays during most of the scenes when the girls are sitting down to talk through their problems with each other and opening up. I think it's just beautiful. Favorite new CG? Definitely the last one with the girls taking a picture of themselves in the club room. There's just something so nice about seeing them all happy in the same shot. Favorite new background? The music room. I really love the design of that room. I think it's super neat. Character who my opinion improved of the most? Natsuki. She definitely got the short end of the stick in the original game, and I loved that we got more time and expansion of her character in these short stories. They were really well done and helped me to have much more respect for her. And now I'm gonna do favorite moment by character. Favorite Monika moment? When she helped Yuri with her letter to Natsuki. I felt like this was when she was at her most presidential, and her and Yuri had some super cute moments during that. Favorite Sayori moment? Her talk with Natsuki about how you are not your feelings. Sayori has a lot of good dialogue in these stories, but that was my favorite talk. Favorite Yuri moment? Her threatening to unleash hell upon Natsuki's so-called friends if they ever hurt her, and helping her get through her panic attack. And favorite Natsuki moment would have to be when she wrote her poem to Sayori. That was a beautiful poem, and learning what it means to her to share her writing with someone like that was amazing. And that's all the bonus awards I could think of. So, with that done, I'm now going to dive into some theories of mine, but I promise I'll try to keep it brief and not go off the rails too much. Now, before I begin, if you haven't watched Matt Pat's game theory videos on Doki Doki, I'd highly recommend them. You can even just check out his latest two that he put out on DDLC+, since he reiterates pretty succinctly his original theory in those videos as well. I watched them before putting out this video, and I basically found myself nodding along to most of what he said. I'll try to explain my thought process as I go through my following theory here as best I can, and hope it makes some semblance of sense. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, DDLC Plus introduced the company known as Metaverse Enterprise Solutions through the new virtual desktop feature. Through that, you receive emails at various stages of playing the game from a group within Metaverse that goes by the name Team Salvation. Team Salvato, anyone? Through reading the emails and hidden project files, you find out the project they're working on involves them working on the hypothesis that they're living in a simulated universe and how to stop it from being destroyed. Which is strange, considering how Metaverse, on the surface at least, appears to be a B2B solutions company if you go by their mission statement. According to the project plan file, it seems this whole thing was started by Paula, the project manager, and in that plan she outlines that the end goal of this whole thing is to pitch her research to upper management as a profitable venture, get promoted, and save jobs. Makes me wonder if she was fired or on the verge of being fired, and this is her last-ditch effort to stop that, or maybe the company is having some financial difficulties. I'm not sure. But this seems to be backed up in the DDLC file, where it reads, "We're all working our asses off with our jobs on the line." So the same seems to be true for the members of this group. So that makes me think that more so that the entire Metaverse company is on the verge of collapse. And so this group is researching something that may turn a profit for them so they can all keep their jobs. So that's one of my theories, or ponderings, if you will. Moving on from that, Paula gathers her crew together of Ro, Ravi, Lib, and Ive. Through the emails and secret files, you see that they've put together two virtual machines to collect data on how entities react when they discover they're in a simulated world. This took me a while to figure out, but I think after rereading everything and watching Game Theories video, it's safe to conclude that VM1 is the original DDLC game we played back in 2017. Going back to the project plan file, we can see that at the bottom it lists VM1 details, which includes literature setting with 4 entities or characters. I originally thought maybe the side stories was VM1, but after reading the email labeled side stories, it very clearly states that the side stories are part of the control simulation and that there's some differences in character information in VM1. Not to mention that when you access the side stories panel, it says that they are unrelated to the events of the main game. So while all the events feel very much like a prequel, it's not actually a prequel to the game we first played. In Meeting Notes 3, it mentions how the control simulation is set earlier in time, and that they would compare the end of it with the start of VM1, which is exactly how the side stories ended. Okay, so we've established that the control simulation is the side stories, and VM1 is the main game. While having the same characters and set in the same literature setting, they're not actually directly related, which actually makes me really happy, because I can imagine the girls in the control sim continuing to grow in their friendships and not experiencing the horrors of the first game at all. As long as Monica doesn't realize her advanced access levels in that control sim anyway. Here's hoping. Okay, but with that being said, what is VM2? Simply put, VM2 is the universe where Project Libitina is taking place. And if you'd like a fully, very well explained version of what that is, I'd once again highly recommend Game Theories videos on this, because it involves a lot of file delving, both in the original and this game, and it explains very clearly all the info there is with that universe and the project. It is quite unsettling though, so viewer discretion be advised and all that, but if you're curious, do go check that out. That theory makes total sense to me, and I'm definitely on that train. Also, something I was really happy about, remember my theory about Test VM, where it had all those random pieces of text, and I thought maybe they formed longer sentences if you put them in the right way? Turns out that was true! Thank goodness for game theory and the hard work put in over there to figure out which sentences connected. It definitely gives more information about the experiments being run over in VM2, and it's crazy. So I just had to get that out there. Like, I was right about that! But anyway, I wanted to get back to my main theory. Through the emails, we see that Paula is finished with VM1. She's ready to move on, since she believes the team has collected all the data that's possible from that, and they need to refocus their efforts on creating a stable link to VM2, in order to start collecting data from there. We see in further emails, plus the existence of Test VM, that they are able to make some headway into this venture. However, there seems to be an unintended side effect, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But first, I want to talk about a hidden letter from Monica that's buried deep in her character file. A lot of you may be familiar with this already, but I'm just going to highlight part of it. This is what she says. Everyone else is dead. Maybe you already know that. I'm sure you do, actually. But it doesn't have to be that way, right? Well, there's a lot of stuff I don't understand. I don't know if it's even possible for me to understand it, but I know that this isn't my only story. I can see that now, really clearly. And I think everyone else has had the same kind of experience. Some kind of deja vu. It's the third eye, right? Anyway, I could be totally wrong about this, but I really think you might be able to do something. I think you might be able to go back. Or however you want to put it. To go back and tell them what's going to happen. If they know ahead of time, then they should be able to avoid it. They should. If they remember their time with me in the other worlds, they should remember what I tell them. So, I think this letter from Monica is talking about how she and the other girls don't exist in just VM1's universe, but that they also exist in VM2's universe. Her saying this isn't her only story and talking about the third eye and how the other characters are experiencing deja vu would seem to confirm that. And it sounds like she's watched her friends die, possibly many times in that world. In this letter, you can see she's trying to come up with a plan to save them. Here she's asking someone to reset that VM and tell those characters what is going to happen to them before it happens, so that they can avoid their fate. But I wonder if she tried another plan before this that failed, but will actually end up being a key part of the puzzle that will help us to save those characters when the time comes. What I'm referring to is this email. Issues caused by unprotected memory. Has anyone evaluated the side effects that might be caused by sharing a memory pool between multiple VMs rather than allocating them separately? I'm looking at some of the files VM1 is generating, and I'm finding some information that definitely shouldn't be there. I haven't seen any evidence that this is actually affecting the inside of the VM itself, so I don't think this is a priority, but it's definitely worth noting. My best guess is that memory being freed from VM2 isn't getting zeroed out, which technically gives VM1 access to it. All the info I have will go into the issue tracker, but I wanted to check if anyone else already noticed something along these lines. I think we can infer that Monica is accessing VM2's files through this shared memory pool, which is how she knows this isn't hers or the other character's only story, and that they actually exist in this other VM as well. But there's also the note about how there's files VM1 is generating that shouldn't be there. What if Monica was trying to transfer the character files from VM2 over to VM1 in order to save her friends? Because if you look at the information hidden in the character files, except for Yuri's, they all seem to involve information about Project Libetina's universe. And I can't help but wonder if that is what actually caused the characters to glitch out in the original game. Not because Monica was trying to give herself a root and trying to get you to hate the other characters, but she was actually trying to transfer those files over, and because the connection isn't stable between the two VMs, it just ended up corrupting the character files in VM1's universe instead. What if Monica, being in love with the player, was actually an entire cover story to hide what she was doing from Team Salvation? I'm sure she must know that they're monitoring her. What if the entire time she was trying to play her role, so to speak, so that no one would catch on to her plan of transferring files? Because if you think about it, she never actually deletes her friends. And after you delete her, if you get the just Sayori ending, you realize that Monica hasn't been fully deleted either. She managed to back herself up, and I believe she was going to actively continue working in the background on those file transfers. I do think ultimately this plan fails, which is why there's the hidden letter from her in her character file. But I can't help but wonder if the files she managed to hide in the character files are the clues we need to figure out who the girls are in VM2's world. For instance, Natsuki's file has the picture of that blonde girl hidden away. Could that be who Natsuki is in that world? Sayori's file has a hidden medical file on Libetina. Could that be who Sayori is? I know a lot of people think Yuri is Libetina, but what if it's actually Sayori? And as for Yuri, I know you might be thinking that her character file doesn't have anything to do with Project Libetina, and just includes a horror story from Dan Salvato that was put in for fun. But maybe there's nothing pertinent in her character file because her data transfer was the most successful out of all the girls. I think this because she has the book Portrait of Markov that she's reading even before the universe starts breaking. The little bit that Yuri describes about that book definitely sounds like VM2's world. Why is Yuri drawn to that book? It's a decidedly different kind of fantasy than what she's into in the controlled simulation world. Remember how the side stories email said, some details of the characters' lives here and there differ a little bit from those in VM1, even trivial ones. Is it part of the butterfly effect from some of Monica's fundamental changes, or is it a result of her just messing around with the other characters in VM1 as her own experiment, or for fun? I think Yuri's interest in that book is intentional tampering on Monica's part. That book may even have been created by Monica to help Yuri's memories along. Consider, too, that Yuri, in my opinion, undergoes the most radical personality change out of all the girls. And those changes match up a lot with the symptoms and behavior of the girls undergoing experiments in Project Libetina's world. I think Yuri may have been the closest Monica got to successfully transferring files between the two VMs, but even Yuri couldn't handle it in the end. But getting back to the Portrait of Markov, the MC comments on how the protagonist of the book reminds him of Yuri, which makes me wonder if Yuri will be the protagonist character in VM2's world, which is our clue as to how we'll find her. And as for Monica, I think our clue for her is actually hidden in the last email you unlock in this game, but which is actually sent the earliest. Let's move on. In part, we read, "We've obviously gotten spoiled by the ease of access that VM1 offers us, but it's just unrealistic for someone in real life to be granted a level of elevation even close to monitor kernel access." I definitely think that this is how Monica got her name in this VM. When I read that originally, I was like, that seems familiar, and then after watching Game Theories videos, I'm like, oh, I see it now. So I think the clue to her character in VM2 is found at the end of this same email. "I'm going to spin up a read-only hypervisor that we can use to test different ideas like this. The elevation level will be set to Monitor Adjacent Runtime Level Access. The VM will just be named Test VM for now, although the parallel access unit they're building in the VM seems to be called Project Libitina, according to the few logs we have. We can change the name once we actually get a decent picture of it." Notice the Monitor Adjacent Runtime Level Access? If you take the first letter of each of those words, it spells out Marla. Now, I also think it's a possibility that level may not be included in this acronym, since it's part of a hyphenated word, in which case it could be Mara. But either way, I think Marla or Mara is a pretty good guess as to who Monica is in VM2. So in conclusion, even though Monica's initial plan didn't work, I think the files she was able to bring over will play a big part in actually helping us save the characters in the next game. So yeah, that's my working theory for both this game and the next game. Monica's love for the player was just a cover-up for the behind-the-scenes file transferring she was doing to save her friends. But when that didn't work, she reached out to the player character again to see if there's a way for them to reset VM2, and figure out who's who to warn them of their fates, and that'll be the main focus of the next game. As to what kind of game that one will be, though, I can't even guess. I have no idea if it'll be another visual novel, or something more along the lines of, let's say, Resident Evil or something like that. We'll just have to wait and see. I, for some reason, can't shake the feeling that the backgrounds we see in Doki Doki are going to make a reappearance in the next game, but creepified to a whole other level. Every time I look at the hallway background in particular, I can't help but feel how easy it would be to turn that into an asylum hallway. But anyway, I digress. If you managed to listen to my rambles this long, then I thank you most profusely. I hope that made some kind of sense. And if you have some thoughts you'd like to add to that, or a theories of your own, I'd love to hear them if you'd like to share. And of course, if you'd like to share your thoughts on the side stories just generally, or have some bonus awards of your own, then I'd love to hear that as well. But that is it from me. I have yacked long enough. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. I enjoyed our weekly therapy sessions and I'm going to miss them terribly, but I am looking forward to what will happen next in this universe because it should be interesting to say the least. And with that, we'll be moving on to a new game on Monday, which will be Changeling, which I'm really looking forward to. And the other game we're going to check out along with Changeling will be Steam Prison, which I've been asked to play for a long time, and I'm really looking forward to checking that out also. Hope to see you guys over there for those new adventures, and thank you once again for joining me here. Until next time, I will see you later.
Just move your hand right the way into his heart. But in this world of infinite choices, what will it take just to find that special day? What will it take just to find that special day?